Hi, it's Maria, and today we're going to have a really interesting conversation about the different pieces of litigation that I have been involved in. And I don't think I've ever really been very concise in describing them and listing them. And in fact, that's what we're going to learn about today, because so many of us are involved in various aspects of litigation. The most prevalent is the divorce, is in family court. And so we only realize later how things have been set up all along in order to get us at that place where we are. I never even imagined that 50 years before, people were plotting and planning how, in fact, they were going to help themselves to my grandparents' and parents' money. And so only later do we realize that, in fact, yeah, these people were no dummies. They plotted and planned all along. And so we're going to focus today on the truth of who we really are as well. Because when we focus on that, when we remember that, then we are able to see things from a higher perspective. And so we're not going to focus on the bad guys and the criminals and the cheaters and the liars and the thieves, because even though they are there, they are playing their role, because we really are starring in the movie of our life. And if we can keep that perspective, then we don't have as much deep-seated trauma and drama that we have to then heal from, because we don't allow it to infiltrate and violate our core and the core of who we are. Because we can kind of be on the sidelines and we can say, yeah, well, I understand why they did that, because they needed this to happen. And so one follows the other, like the game of dominoes. When you push one domino, all of a sudden the next one and the next one and the next one, and then they all fall in line. And so right now, I'm going to tell you how I was able to understand what was going on, because certainly no one was going to share that information with me, because everyone that I spoke with, basically, and that was in my life, was somehow involved in it, which is the most shocking thing of all. Really, I just couldn't imagine. And that was the point of people being on my phone and being on my computer and hacking into all my things, because then they knew exactly who was involved and what they were to do and how it was all going to play out, because they'd all have these meetings and things like that. It was just so creepy that I always knew that there was something really conspiratorial going on, and yet I couldn't put my fingers on it, because I couldn't imagine that people were just being so underhanded and doing all of this. And so finally, it was after enough, 2x4s on the head, it's kind of like, oh yeah, wake up, or alarms waking me up saying, oh yeah, Maria, wake up, because it's so obvious. How could you not know? And I guess it's because sometimes we really are very innocent. And so, and especially, I think there was really a lot of voodoo and hexes and spells and things like that, and dark magic. And I know nothing about that, nor do I want to. And yet I was told they travel and they meet people from other countries, and there are Nigerian warlocks, and there are all kinds of people involved in this. And I don't know. I believe in a different God. And so I believe in my God and Jesus and the Christ. And although I believe in the universe and the infinite intelligence of the universe and source energy, I believe in all of it. And I believe that the Buddha was a very ascended master, and I have done Buddhist retreats as well. So interesting. So I really have dabbled in, and of course I was raised Greek Orthodox, a nice little Greek girl, and I've always loved my religion and my church, and yet now I kind of see all of that stuff in a different way, and I realize that we are responsible for who we are, and we don't just pray when we want something, because we are surrounded by heavenly beings and angels and archangels. And I like those pictures that I have visualized in my mind, because I love to think that we are so supported while we're on this planet for such a very short time, and that from here we never know what is being asked of our soul. And so for me, this is a very exciting journey, actually, to be on planet Earth during this time in the evolution of not only humanity, but the Earth itself. And it's just amazing. As I could cry if I think about how lucky we all are to be here now. And of course, there are some really crazy things going on out in the collective, and yet sometimes we have to go through that in order to clear it. It's kind of like a healing crisis. You know, sometimes when you are ill and then you are starting to heal, sometimes you have to get a little worse in order to really get your body to. So anyway, I just wanted to start telling you about the different pieces of litigation that I was involved in. And the first is family court. And who doesn't know someone who's been involved in family court? And in fact, 50% of all marriages end up in family court, and over 70% of subsequent marriages end up in family court. It's not a stranger to any of us. However, there are many couples that are very sensible, really, and that they say, you know what, it's just not working anymore, and so we're just going to separate, and, you know, we'll be very fair with one another. Or the opposite of that is when there's War of the Roses, and I always thought of War of the Georges because that was my last name. It doesn't have to be so horrible, and yet the more attorneys we get involved, the worse it is, the more acrimonious it is, because remember, attorneys make their money from conflict. And so the more acrimonious the situation, the more conflictual the litigation, the more hearings there are, the more motions there are, the more depositions there are, the more BS there is, really. And so it's they can make a mountain out of a molehill. And I always wondered if that expression had anything to do with the legal system. I don't know. And I must say, you know, I'm not anti-attorneys. I went to law school, and yet at the same time, I knew that I couldn't partake in the way that I saw the legal system to be dealing with litigants. And so I will tell you that, let's just start with the first lawsuit was the divorce in family court. There were really 3 trials. The first was for temporary custody, and because the ex and the children were living in the main house, he automatically got temporary custody of the children. And so technically I had only visitation, and that was just kind of a stopgap. Then the second trial was for full custody, and that involved some psychological testing, like the MMPI and the Rorschach, a court-appointed psychiatrist, and then I had to hire a psychiatric witness. Then the third bit of litigation was the division of the financial accounts. I must say that at one point I actually stumbled across an account that had over $1 million in it. It had part of the children's educational trust funds. It was over $1 million. And so I ran to show my attorneys, and they went to court the next day. And basically the judge said, well, I guess that he was less than honest with the court. And then that was all. They never had him replace the $1 million, because actually in the divorce judgment, I was allocated 75% of the marital estate. And I think she knew that by the end, 5 years later, with all kinds of expenses for living expenses and attorney expenses and witness expenses, expert expenses, all of those would really deplete the marital estate. and it did. And there were home equity loans taken out on it. So here the house, I think, was first put on the market at a lowball figure of $3.75 million. By the time it sold 5 years later, and it sold, it closed on exactly the day of the last hearing we had in court. So it was obviously so strategically planned that he and the children were going to live in the house while we were all engaged in the divorce. And then as soon as it ended, then he had to move. And that's when all the furniture was divided and things like that. The house was devalued quite a bit. It was to make it look like it wasn't such a great house anyway. So there was spilled ice cream on the inside doors of the refrigerator, freezer. The sump pump was beeping, and the wine cellar didn't have the right climate control, and the gym had rubber flooring, and someone took chalk and was writing on that, and some of the wallpaper up to the third floor was ripped, and it just made it look like it was just so unkept, right? And that the lady of the house was obviously so crazy she couldn't even fix the pictures and have them hang straight. But you know what? I wasn't living there. I was only walking in and out as the nanny and the housekeeper. Those were the three things involved in family court. And then the fourth one was, it was for supplemental judgments, which is after the divorce is final, then you have some extra things that you need to discuss. For instance, who's going to pay for braces, or who's going to take all the children to all their sports events, or who's going to pay for the lessons or new cars or things like that, or trust funds. And then the fifth was an appeal. So we appealed to the appellate court. So the loser, and basically I was the loser, he was able to get full custody of the children. And then the next piece of litigation was with the appellate court, and that was appealing the unlawful divorce judgment, review it, and to make necessary modifications. I hired an appellate attorney that my divorce attorney had recommended, and I realized that he was covering up the deliberate blunders that my divorce attorney had made. And so that was an extra $30,000 or $50,000 just kind of, just tossed in the garbage. And his brief, wrote it when he was asleep, or a high schooler wrote it, or something like that, because it was really very inferior. The next piece of litigation was legal malpractice. And I was actually contacted by some attorneys saying, you know what, we know how horribly you were represented, and we believe that there was some legal malpractice. And so if you'll hire us, we would like to bring that lawsuit against them. And so I agreed to that because I too felt that I was just pitifully represented. However, they then at one point said, well, you know what? These guys are really nice guys. We met them for lunch. And so they said, we're just not going to sue them. And I thought, oh, wow. So give me back my retainer. It was another $30,000 or $50,000 or whatever. And so they said, well, no, we had to do a lot of due diligence. And so, no, we'll keep it. Then the next piece of litigation was matching my fingerprints to the DNA found in some letter, and they wanted to know if I had sent it. And it was just one thing after another. It was just to drag me back into court, and then I'd have to hire an attorney, and it was just like a big game. And so at one point, I had been so followed and so traumatized and so hacked and so violated by people coming in and out of my a condo that I had rented in Lake Forest, actually, when I moved from the marital house in Kenilworth. It was so frightening, actually, because one night, it happened to be on my daughter's birthday, is when someone was banging at the door, and they were hell-bent on getting in, and it was a really thick wooden door, and they were banging, 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 and my children and I were startled, and fortunately, it was just a God thing, because the week before, I just had this notion that I should get a deadbolt lock that is not opened with a key. I would be able to lock it. And in fact, I heard the guy, whoever was trying to get in, he was trying to use the key in the other lock that was below this deadbolt. And fortunately, because of the deadbolt that I had gotten, he wasn't able to get in. And I, of course, called the police. And then they came, and what they said is that they found that it was really a professional. There were no footprints in the snow, and a person was waiting inside in one of the other condos before they would then come in. So it wasn't like they were walking in and out, and in the cameras by the front door were turned off, and the cameras in the hallway were disengaged. So yes, so that night was just absolute horror. And my daughter and I were actually sleeping on the floor right in front of the door because we wanted to hear if anyone else was going to try to come in. And so in the morning, I ended up going to law enforcement and explained my situation, and they said, oh yes, well, your divorce is very public, we know all about it. And they said, it's probably not a good thing to stay in Chicago, because I knew that my ex had a lot of political connections, and so it just wasn't a good thing for me. So I left Chicago, and I ended up coming to Florida and staying with my parents. And then my father bought me a beautiful condo on the same floor as his and my mother's. And so I was to start anew again, which is wonderful. However, a lot of that garbage followed me, and my poor parents had to deal with, echoes and people violating their home, and people were coming in, and, people are, these hackers or these PIs or whoever they are, these thugs that want to try to frighten us. They do that. And my mother was terrified, because what would happen is her vitamins would be moved, or her perfumes would be moved, or they would be turned upside down, or photos would be face down. And so they would just go to the grocery store for a minute, and then they'd come back. They knew somebody was in there. And so then they were starting to worry, because my ex-husband, during the divorce, it was very clear he had been poisoning me since the honeymoon. And so that explained a lot of my health issues. So one of the things that the FBI had mentioned to me was that in order to save myself, in order to protect myself, actually, I could write a letter or talk to people or just tell people, because there are so many of us that we experience so many things, so many frightening things, and yet we don't discuss it. We don't talk about it, and we just kind of live in fear, and that is so unhealthy. And so I wrote a letter, and I sent it to my attorneys, and they said, yes, it's very good, and so do send it out. So I did. I sent it out to about 3,000 people. And so I had to fly back to Chicago for an order of protection hearing, because my ex-husband actually wanted an order of protection, because he said he didn't want me uttering his name. He didn't want me going to any of our friends. So I was prevented from talking to anybody in business. I was prevented from talking anybody, any type of therapy, any psychologist or whatever. I was prevented from any type of, religious counseling. I couldn't, what else couldn't I do? I couldn't even mention my children's names or contact them. And it was just ridiculous. And there wasn't even a geographic boundary or a time limit. It was just kind of open-ended. And then my attorneys, when they saw that, they said, oh, this is the most unlawful order of protection we've ever heard. And so when I came to Florida, I understand that, in fact, I don't know if he tried to have it instated or whatever, but his reasoning was that he wasn't invited to certain Christmas parties. And because he wasn't invited to Christmas parties, he said that wasn't right, that I was able to tell people that I left Chicago because I was frightened. So that was basically a gag order. And then he sued me for defamation. And In the letter, every word that I wrote was true, actually, but he said that he was damaged. However, he wasn't damaged 1 cent because, in fact, his firm was actually bought out, received a golden parachute, and he had kind of retired. And so he was living a good life. He therefore had a lot of time in order to strategize with his attorneys and say that I had defamed him. And the judge actually in that courtroom said that he knew my ex-husband's family for over 30 years. And so I wondered, what kind of a fair trial was I going to get in that courtroom? Anyway, the verdict was $9.7 million. And it just blew me away. There was no damage. And yet that $9.7 million was exactly the amount that my father had in one of his accounts. I was like, oh my gosh, this is not a coincidence. This is pure strategy. And with statutory interest, right now, that figure is at about 70 million. And by the time I'm 80 years old, it will be $500 million. That's $500 million that a wife, it's the largest personal defamation verdict in the history of the United States. That verdict is just so ridiculous, right? And so what it was is it gave him carte blanche to come in and rape and pillage anything he wanted in my home and not just for a little bit, but he could do this for the rest of my life or the rest of his life or both of them or whatever, because he actually sent Allied van line trucks, you know, those moving trucks that are like huge, they're like half a block long. Well, they came onto the beach where I was living, and they couldn't even get in through the guard gate. It was like a joke. They had to stop traffic for a while, and then they were carrying out my grand piano, and they were carrying out all kinds of other furniture and things like that. And this happened, I think, 4 different times. And so it was like, okay, so you really want that, right? Well, just take it. And so, you know, it was almost like monopoly money. It just wasn't real, because there is no way that you can actually have a verdict for that much money and not show 1 cent of financial damage. He wasn't damaged at all, and he couldn't prove any damages, and it was for future earnings. That was it. He said that in the future he wouldn't be able to get a job. However, that verdict was read on a Friday, and on Monday morning, there were articles in the local newspapers, in the Chicago Tribune and in the Sun-Times. He was hired by a fabulous boutique New York investment bank for a fabulous amount of money. And so I thought, wow, that's so crazy. And then I just didn't even appeal it, because there was no point in appealing it. My parents, in their will and trust, had a spendthrift clause that showed that he is not allowed to take a penny of my inheritance to satisfy any type of a debt, to satisfy a legal judgment. However, he took the verdict to another judge in Florida, and she said, sure, go ahead, take whatever you want. I guess he just kind of forgot to show the spendthrift provision in the trust. And of course, all of this was going on behind my back, so I was not able to say anything. And so they just kind of railroaded anything they wanted. But that was the defamation lawsuit, which received a lot of publicity. Oh, they had set up a lot of stalkers, and there was one stalker that in fact had kind of ruined my car. I had an SUV, and he ruined my car, and then he said, well, you know, I'm really sorry, and I'll buy you another car. So I really didn't want another car, but he bought the car, and then he fixed my previous car, and then gave that away to one of my friends. And then he sued me for the car that he had bought me, even though he had put it in my name. And so the point of that was to leave me without a car. So it's very strategic. People's minds just are all about, how can we really hurt someone? How can we make them suffer and create pain in their lives? And it's just so ridiculous. So you have to kind of sit back and you can just say, oh my gosh, yes, what am I going to do? I have no car. And then you think, you know what? It's all going to be okay because this is what they do. And we just can't let all of these crazy things going out in the world affect who we are. And so to just realize that people are damaged, people are wounded, people have all kinds of childhood issues, people are envious, they're jealous, they just are mean and just miserable people. And so when people have all of that negativity within them, then they spew all that negativity out into the world. And so if you take a look at the world, you know that in fact it's a very painful place for many, many people. Yes, I've had so many thefts too, because I did my condo was kind of like a little museum. It had pieces of furniture from the 18th century and 19th century, and there were antique paintings and antique this and antique that, and just gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous pieces of art. And they were just gone like that. And as it turned out, I never realized, but my sister was working closely with my ex. And so now what I've heard is that actually my sister has stolen a lot of my possessions, actually in charge of giving my son my home. And that's why I was left homeless, was because my son actually got my home. And he already had 2 other homes. Had a home in Chicago, and then he had a home in London. And so his mother was homeless. And when I called him and I said, Peter, you know, you can have my condo. I will put it in your name if you'd like, because everything I had was going to go to my children anyway. And I said, but however, I want to live there because I have no other place to live. And so he said, no, you know, if you don't like the way it is, then you can call my attorney, but I'm not going to talk to you anymore, Mom. And so I thought, okay, well, if that's how you want to live. I personally loved my parents, and they were so amazing to me. And so I couldn't even imagine anyone even thinking along those lines, much less verbalizing those thoughts. It's really sick. There was that one gentleman, I use that term loosely, who actually sued me for the car. He then came to my condo building, and as I was getting into my car in the garage, and he ran around as he saw me, and then came and was ready to hit me or do something to my head. A friend that was standing next to me intervened and took the beating. The police came and he was arrested, and we had a trial. However, his attorneys, I guess, were very well connected with the judges. It seemed that way because they'd say, so how's your wife, Judge? And say hello to the grandchildren and give her my best and things like that. And then at the end, it was, well, he gets a little slap on the hand because he really shouldn't have done that, but he's not going to bother you anymore, right? And so I thought, gosh, we've gotten to the point where money talks. And it's so obvious. And I think money has always spoken very loudly and clearly. However, it's gotten to the point where it's so obvious that you almost want to just vomit because it's just so gross. And you have people that are just, you know, just spending money and just showing off and everything. And it's not even their money. They have credit card debt. They have stolen the money. They are stealing the money. They are copying people's creations. They are just doing all kinds of illegal and unethical and immoral things. And so you think, wow, have you ever looked in the mirror in a while, I guess? Because I don't know how you can stand what you see. Because there's not integrity, there are no ethics, there are no morals, there's no loyalty, there's no honesty, there's no responsibility, there's no accountability. And so what exactly are you doing? You're just here to create havoc in the lives of others. And I think that that's such a pitiful, pitiful reason to be, right? Because we come with nothing onto this planet, and we have so much at our fingertips. And there's so many things that we can learn and we can do and we can help and we can serve and we can be the best that we can be, right? And yet so many people want to stay stuck in the mud in their daily grind of, let's see, who can I stalk today and who can I kind of steal from today, and whose accounts can I hack into so I can funnel some of their money into my account. And it's just ridiculous. And then, so all of that stuff was going on in the divorce, and then subsequent there too. And then all of a sudden, in 2010, my father died, and in 2011, my mother died. And so we had all of a sudden, this was all being repeated in probate, because when my parents died, my sister had gotten hold of the will and the trust, and unbeknownst to me, and I was actually in Brazil, and so she then, I guess, whited out my name because everything was to be 50-50 between my sister and me. And yet, in fact, she kind of changed the documents. And all of a sudden, it was 0 to me, 100% to her. And my home went to my son. And I was like, so what happened to me? I'm the oldest. I was actually the favorite. And with my parents, everything was 50-50. I got a big 0. In fact, I wasn't even allowed to go to my home to take anything, or to even stay there, or to even see it, or to even get my clothes, or computers. I had 5 computers up there. Nothing. I could have nothing. I still, after all these years, I still have not gone there because my son, I guess, sold the condo and did all kinds of things. It was just a lot of criminal activity. When I talked to the police chief and the police and the sheriff, they all said, hire an attorney. And then when I went to hire an attorney, they all said, oh, this is really criminal. You need to talk to the police and the sheriff. No one would help me. And then one of the attorneys actually disclosed to me that no attorney in the entire state of Florida was allowed to help me. And I thought, well, that's ridiculous. I had actually listed all the crimes that I had witnessed, and there were over 175 crimes and torts, really for some serious jail time. However, it's been, 30 years in court, and 50 years strategizing, 20 years strategizing before the 30 years in court. And so we really have, in our legal system, it really does ensnare a lot of innocent people in kind of a criminal web of bogus judgments, including all those that I mentioned. And so they all kind of follow the same recipe, which is really interesting. The ex and my sister, I think they thought I was so stupid or something that I wouldn't be able to fight for myself, or they thought that I would be so shell-shocked and so horrified that I would actually be in like some type of a stupor, right? And that I wouldn't even believe that this was going on. And under other circumstances, I can see how that would really be the case for many people. However, not only did I have to stand my ground, but it took me a long time to recover in order to stand my ground, because I witnessed the murder of both of my parents, and I knew that the level of malice was so high that they would have no problem at all bumping me off as well. And there are I've been told that the cars that had exploded, that was a warning sign for me, because I had leased a 2020 Honda Odyssey that was rumbling and smoking. I knew that that was probably on the list of what was going to happen to my car. And all of a sudden, there were two other cars that just spontaneously, I just saw they just started to ignite. And I was just so horrified that I thought, oh gosh. And then I had heard about the hired hitmen that are near wherever I go, or the creepers that are following me and entering, and the plans for armed robbery, and the poisonings of the food, and the paying of people to betray me, and the copying of my writing, and the hacking into all my accounts and things like that. And what they do actually, because I am such a prolific writer, that I keep the word count, that's part of the program. And so what happens is they just will delete things that they don't want out. And yet word count will be the same, because what they'll do is they will duplicate other paragraphs. They'll like double them up, or they'll just keep repeating sentences. And so unless you are able to go through the entire document all the time, yeah, they totally interfere in everything you do. Every time you get on the computer, they're notified, and they're just sitting there like creepers, just kind of watching. And it's really disgusting. And I realized that I was like a flagged person. And what I was told about that is that if someone goes to the authorities and makes some type of a report and says, oh, she's a national security risk, or, oh, she's mentally unstable, or, oh, she's delusional, or she's this, or she's that, and she's a threat, become flagged. And so people don't want to take you seriously, right? People think, oh, well, she's a little off her rocker. That's really shameful, because then you have the person who's really guilty, they're conspiring with law enforcement, and they both have a common enemy, which is the person that they're stalking. And so then my sister or whoever would be in your situation, then they actually have the benefit of watching all the stalkers stalk the person. And so they just sit back. It's almost like a comedy show, right? They sit back and they just kind of watch what you're doing, because the police and the FBI or whoever they've contacted is watching you. You're on the list as someone questionable, right? In Florida, called Baker acting. And Baker acting is an involuntary commitment. If, in fact, you present a threat to someone, or you present a threat to yourself. And so I remember, before my parents actually had died, I remember my father said, your sister is so crazy that she will try to get rid of all of us and have us all Baker acted. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, that is really sick. And in terms of like the people that were in my life, so even the men that were in my life, basically, they could barely handle all the attacks that we had experienced together. And how would you like it if you knew you were being watched and followed and stuff? Why would you stay? I mean, it's just not worth it, right? And so I must say that I saw more than my share of people just caving, and people saying, I can't do this. And then two had basically a nervous breakdown. And so I even have more guilt, thinking that all because of the way that my family was treating us, and that this was collateral damage. And I thought, wow, there's some heavy karma to be paid, right? But we don't even want to think about the heavy karma. We just want the insanity to stop. And so, there are so many now YouTube videos on narcissism. And before it was, I guess we talk about psychopaths. And there isn't that much of a difference between psychopaths and narcissists. And so narcissists, they love to prey on you, especially during your holidays. So, because they want you to have such horrible memories of holidays, right? And you think the dread of like, oh my gosh, it's going to be Christmas, or it's going to be Thanksgiving or something. So there's going to be some disaster. And then generally they create some disaster for you. And so it's just to make your life miserable. And you think, wow, that's what you were put on this planet for? And you're so unhappy with yourself that you choose to make other people unhappy. And it's just so shocking. I personally, it's just not on my radar screen. I can't even imagine lying and doing things that are to someone else's detriment. Because if we all just stayed in our own lane, and if we all just took care of ourselves and just tried to make the world just around us better, then the world would change, because everybody would be doing it, right? And so everybody would be helping each other. And so that really is, I believe, the way things need to be. And slowly but surely, I think we are headed in the right direction. But it is a very painful process for so many. And truly, the legal system does need a reform, because it just breeds cheating and lying and stealing and lack of integrity and just ego, right? The bigger the win, the greater the loss for you. And so it's just ridiculous when we should be thinking about all the good things, really celebrating all our birthdays because we made it another year, and just telling people we love them and showing kindness. I just read about something where at a coffee shop, they have this thing about paying it forward. And so, no, it's called something else, where they actually have receipts where people have given money. And so if somebody that's homeless comes in and says, may I have some coffee, or do you have a sandwich? And so they'll say, yes, somebody paid for it already. And so they take the receipt down from the bulletin board or something, and they said, here, this is for you. And so we'll give you whatever this person paid for. And so it just is so wonderful that we are thinking about other people, and that it's not just ego, 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 and I'm so great, and I want this, and I want that, and I don't really care about you because it's all about me. And so I think, oh, that is just so yucky. Yuck. But sometimes I would actually sit back and I think, I had such an amazing education, from Northwestern to Indiana to law school to just everything I did. It was just so wonderful. And I studied medicine, I studied law, I studied psychology, I studied virtually anything I could get my hands on, really. The only thing I couldn't do or didn't want to really learn about was taxes. I have just no interest in that. And yet that's a very important thing to know about. But I would just sit there and think, wow, I was rich, but I'm absolutely poor, or I was absolutely poor and hungry, and none of the people who stole my fortune have any remorse. And I thought, wow, that's just amazing. That is just so disgusting. And so these crimes don't just happen. There's a strategy for years, actually for decades. And so they strategize the theft and the torture that goes along with it, because it's not enough just to hurt somebody, but you really want to make them pay. You really want to watch them so that you can have a good laugh while you're sitting there at the restaurant celebrating and doing toasts and just, enjoying the show. And so it's really disgusting. And I guess, that actually led me to think, what is it when you have money? And so I used to at one point feel guilty about that. And I just wondered if people wanted to be with me, or if they wanted to be with me because of the money. And so that's a whole other thing that we can get into. Subconsciously, I think many people think that way because they wonder, so are these people being nice to me because I have a boat and they want to go sailing? Or did they want to just be with me and the boat is, an extra bonus? Sometimes we just trying to overanalyze. Oh, the bankruptcy. Yes, I actually took the bankruptcy after the $9.7 million verdict because my attorney said, well, that's ridiculous. You're never going to be able to pay that off. And so just file bankruptcy. And so the judge actually said, well, if in fact you were really afraid and that's why you wrote the letter because law enforcement actually helped you, then that's great. And so we will just erase that judgment. It will go through the bankruptcy. And that was one way of dealing with it. And then she said, if I realize that you were being vengeful, then you're going to be stuck with that. And as it turned out, toward the end, she just said, you know what? I don't think you were really afraid. And so you're just stuck with that. However, I did also hear that my attorneys actually said, well, you know what? She has a business relationship with your ex-husband's attorneys. And I was like, what? I don't even want to hear that, because that ruining my life because of a business relationship. I was really disgusted with that. And so, but again, you know what? It's just part of the movie script. It's a giant movie where the cast knew what to do and when to do it in order to win, right? And so each time this happens, it's kind of the level of cruelty goes up a notch. And so I have seen so many things that were so patently illegal and unethical, for sure, and have been so repeatedly blindsided that just to survive their attacks was a Herculean task, actually. And again, you know what? These weren't ghetto thugs. I mean, this was an ex, a sister, and a son who the three of them just enjoyed watching me suffer. And I thought, the only reason you're doing that is because I really didn't give you much attention, because I could tell that you were not my kind of people. I don't care about the blood relation or anything, but I knew that I couldn't trust you. And so if I can't trust someone, then I really don't want to be around them. And so it's just too bad that you just engage in perjury and forgery and cheating and lying and stealing and scams and identity theft. You've stolen my identity how many times now? And all of this right under my nose, and yet no one would help me. And so, all we can do is keep writing. I love to write letters, right? I wrote another letter about how $50 million was stolen in the Pinellas County Courthouse. That was my latest letter because it's absolutely true. And we talk about contacting the police and the sheriff and the mayor and the council members and the governor and the congressmen and senators and law school faculty and private and public agencies and Washington and the White House. And so most of it has fallen on dead ears. Well, actually, not most of it, all of it, which is so shocking. And I begged the governor's office to give him the message, and I would just like 5 minutes of his time, and yet they never called me back. And yet it says on the website, if you have something if you want the governor to come and cut a ribbon, he will, he can probably schedule that. And I thought, wow, I don't want to cut a ribbon. I just want to tell you about my $50 million being stolen. And so I really need your help, because someone told all these attorneys that they weren't allowed to help me. So who was it? Who was it? The attorneys just didn't come and decide this by themselves, right? The attorneys want business. And so was it the governor? Was it Washington? Was it senators? Who was it? Some politicians? Was it some organization? Was it, I don't know who it was. All I know is that I can't find an attorney to help me. And so I thought, well, that just doesn't make sense. After the divorce, I was just so shocked, and I was cross-referencing it. I spent tens of thousands of dollars on certified court transcripts in my office. My extra bedroom in my condo was like an office, and it had file cabinets on the 3 walls, and I had all the transcripts of 5 years of litigation in the divorce. And then I also had what had happened since then, which was the bankruptcy and the defamation and things like that. By them taking my home, they also took the proof of all of that information, of all of those crimes. Do you see? And so they can then present all kinds of documents, and they can just be made up, and they can just be written up. Just like I realized that lab reports, yes, when you go to the doctor, the diagnoses and the notes that they write, if your attorney, if you're in a lawsuit and your attorney doesn't like that, well, those can be edited. And in fact, I mean, that's totally illegal and totally unethical. But in fact, I know that it has happened in my case, and I'm not speaking for anybody else, but I know that lab reports, lab values have been changed. And so there really is not anything that is 100% true, right? Because everything can be manipulated, and people are lying. And it's one thing if you're just going to lie, it's a white lie or something, and you're lying about yourself. Like you want to say, oh, you know what, I just lost 10 pounds, and you know, you lost 4, or you didn't lose any, or you gained 12. You know, that's on you. But when you're lying to the detriment of someone else, that is full of just the most horrific karma. And so many of us see the wheels of karma just spinning for people that are doing all of these malevolent activities. And so wouldn't it just be wonderful if like a light bulb went on, and all of a sudden people said, gosh, you know what I'm doing is actually self-destructive. And even in terms of like the black magic and the hexes and the graveyard spells and all that kind of stuff, wouldn't it be wonderful if all of a sudden they stopped all that? Because many times that stuff turns around and goes back to the sender. And so they're just hurting themselves and creating more pain and misery for themselves. It's almost like a heroin addict just doing that, and they're really self-destructing. I mentioned to you about the documents. Yes, all that I had there. And so you just wonder what's wrong with people, you know, and your stomach just turns, and you think there's such extreme arrogance. People want to just hurt other people, and that's actually contributing to their own personal downfall. Oh, I know what I was going to tell you. Well, when I was told that there was black magic and all of that stuff, and I had gone to the hairdressers, well, actually, when I had my big, beautiful home and everything, and more money than I knew what to do with ever, then I would actually fly to New York every 6 weeks and have my hair trimmed, because I had this wonderful French hairdresser that was there, and so he was very cute, and so he was just lots of fun. I had some of my friends, they knew about him as well, and so we all got together and we talked him into moving to Chicago at least 1 week every 6 weeks, so that we didn't have to go to New York, and he could have a studio in Chicago. And then afterwards, I was back in Florida, and I found another little hairdresser here on the beach, and she would cut my hair. And so she'd say, oh my gosh, she'd say, well, haven't you jumped off a bridge yet? She'd say, I couldn't even imagine the things you're going through. And so she did such a good job with my hair. And so people that knew me or that had heard about the things I was going through were just like totally shocked. But what I wanted to tell you is that I never used to believe that stuff. I couldn't even watch The Exorcist because I had some friends, it was when I was at Northwestern, and some of my friends said that they couldn't sleep for a week after watching that movie. So I thought, stay away. I don't want to know anything about that. But there really is, just like there are angels and archangels and the positive and the light, there is the dark. And what I realized is that what had happened is that when I would go for a haircut, whoever was in charge, whoever was my sister's flying monkey, who would go and kind of do all the dirty things that she wanted them to do, they would go and collect my hair and do hexes and spells on it. And I had the most beautiful hair. It was always very thick, and it was straight, or it was curly, or whatever, you know, whatever I wanted it to be. And it was just beautiful, and I just loved my hair. And, you know, all of a sudden, like, my hair is not my hair. I was like, I wake up and I'm like, well, who's messing with my hair now? It doesn't even feel like my hair. It's like, it's almost like straw. And someone said, oh yeah, that's black magic done on your hair. And I'm like, oh my God. So, you know, you like to think that none of that stuff ever really holds true. But, and you know, it's going to be worse for them. Maybe they'll lose all their hair. I don't know. But the thing is that there's just, like, grow up. Why are you acting so stupid? I mean, it's really, do you really get such delight out of just messing with people's lives and their hair or whatever it is you do? I just think it's just enough. So I'm going to end it right there. And thank you for being here. And we'll make another video really soon. And I just want you to know how much I love you, and I appreciate you tuning in. And I wish you only the best. And I love you, love you, love you. Mwah.